Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a seriously fascinating concept from a recent sermon by Stephen Wilhoit. He takes a look at the ancient text of Philippians chapter 3, exploring that classic theological debate, grace versus works. But here's the hook. He frames it all through a modern metaphor that hits pretty close to home, the spiritual resume. I mean, we've all felt that pressure, right? The urge to pad our credentials or make ourselves look just a bit better on paper. But what happens when we try to pull that same move in the spiritual realm? Okay, let's dive into this, because this simple question brings us to the wild and absolutely true story of a woman named Veronica Theon. She applied for this massive, highly coveted job, and on paper, her resume looked literally flawless. But as we're about to see, an impeccable record doesn't always match reality. So back in 2014, Veronica actually lands this lucrative, six-figure chief information officer gig with the Australian government. And she got it based on elite educational degrees and just dazzling references. But honestly, it only took about a month for the whole facade to crumble. She started acting super erratic, showing intense paranoia, and couldn't even handle basic tasks. Obviously, this triggers a massive government investigation. And what they found? No way. It was staggering. Her entire resume was totally made up. She never went to those universities, and get this, she actually used a phone spoofing app to fake her own glowing references. Jump ahead a year, and she's disgraced and sentenced to prison for fraud. All those fabricated achievements completely went up in smoke. And the speaker uses this exact narrative tension to ask a really profound question. How often do human beings attempt to do this exact same thing spiritually?
This brings us to the core theological premise of the sermon, a concept we're calling the cosmic audit. The source material posits that every single day people conceptually print out this padded spiritual resume to hand over to God. You know exactly the type. It's when we quietly stack up our good deeds like, oh, I've got perfect small group attendance, or I'm the only one in my family who actually takes religion seriously, or I work so hard to be a good parent. It's this deep human temptation to pile up moral accolades. We kind of hope that if the page looks full enough, we'll somehow pass a hypothetical audit of our souls and prove our intrinsic worth to the divine.
But here's where the main thesis really kicks in. The text argues that when it comes to divine acceptance, all those human achievements, they completely fail. The speaker makes this radical, totally counterintuitive point. Adding your own achievements doesn't reinforce your spiritual resume at all. It actually ruins it. And to back this up, the sermon breaks this idea down into three main arguments based on the Apostle Paul's historical teachings.
Argument number 1, pedigree. Specifically, how detailing your pedigree actually demotes his power.
The source material grounds this argument in a very real first-century conflict. Back then, there was an elite group of legalists known as the Judaizers, and they were insisting that physical circumcision, like the literal cutting of the flesh, was a mandatory physical addition to faith in Christ. But the text flips the script entirely on these guys. It basically posits that relying on physical actions of the flesh actually makes a person spiritually unclean. What's really required is a spiritual circumcision, a supernatural surgery and changing of the heart that literally no human can perform. Only the Spirit of God can do that. So by demanding this physical pedigree, the text argues they were actually declaring God's saving work as totally insufficient. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the Apostle Paul's own elite pedigree. I mean, if anyone could rely on their background to pass a cosmic audit, it was this guy. Just look at these credentials. Circumcised exactly on the 8th day, born of the pure tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, a strict Pharisee, zealous enough to actually persecute the early church, and legally blameless. The speaker systematically lays this all out to show us the massive cultural and religious capital Paul was giving up. And yet Paul argues that even this flawless, impeccable pedigree gave him absolutely zero confidence before God.
Which leads us to the second argument, performance. How elevating personal performance erodes his purity. To really drive this theological stance home, the speaker quotes the ancient prophet Isaiah, who states, "All our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment," or, as you might have heard in some popular translations, filthy rags. Now catch that real quick. It doesn't say our bad deeds are a polluted garment, it says our righteous deeds are. The whole premise here is that when operating under a standard of absolute perfection, even our very best virtues are inherently flawed. When used to try and earn divine favor, they actually become a spiritual liability rather than an asset.
The speaker uses a sort of theological math to really lock this in. Imagine, for a second, an infinite distance between a perfectly holy God and inherently sinful humanity. Now, if you take that infinite distance and subtract a handful of finite human good deeds from it, what are you left with? Right, you still have an infinite gap. Doing the math, it doesn't move the needle a single inch in the right direction.
The sermon boils all this complex theology down into two incredibly striking equations that cleanly present the logic. First up, Jesus plus anything equals nothing. This just means that trying to add your own human effort to divine work ruins the whole shebang. It arrogantly declares the divine work wasn't enough on its own. But on the flip side, Jesus minus anything equals everything. This suggests that no matter what earthly accomplishments, status, or items you might lose in this life, if you just retain that relationship with Jesus, you still possess absolutely everything of true value.
And that brings us to the third and final section, proficiency. How flaunting proficiency forfeits his partnership.
The Apostle Paul uses some seriously extreme language in the original text to hammer this point. He looks at all his past proficiencies and he calls them skubalin. And actually, scratch that. It's not just regular trash like an empty cereal box. The term literally translates to human excrement, like the absolute worst, most vile kind of waste imaginable. The sermon highlights this shocking word choice to explain just how utterly worthless Paul considered his earthly proficiency when compared to the ultimate treasure, the pearl of great price, which is gaining Christ.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this radical concept didn't just stay buried in the ancient world. Think about the powerful historical anecdote of Martin Luther, a super religious monk back in the 1500s. Luther was practically paralyzed by crippling anxiety over his own sins. He'd spend hours in the confessional, absolutely terrified because he believed he could never be proficient or good enough to earn God's favor. But when he finally grasped the concept Paul was teaching here, everything shifted. It led to this dramatic quote: "All at once, I felt I had been born again and entered into paradise itself through open gates."
So, the crucial point is what exactly caused Luther's massive breakthrough. Well, it was the discovery of what he famously called alien righteousness. As defined here, it's a perfect righteousness that comes entirely from the outside, from God. It is not something generated from within through exhausting, anxious human effort. Understanding this idea of an external, gifted righteousness finally resolved Luther's impossible lifelong struggle to just earn God's favor on his own merit. To sharply contrast these two ways of operating, the speaker shares a great military anecdote about writing officer performance reports. On a human resume, you pack it with linguistic gymnastics and abbreviations. You are absolutely terrified of leaving any white space at the end of a line, because white space means you're underperforming, and hey, your salary depends on it. It is utterly exhausting to maintain. But look at the gospel resume. The text posits that it operates on a perfectly restful, divine metric. It's washed white as snow. In fact, it is practically entirely blank white space, containing only one single word to represent perfection.
The sermon calls this mechanism the Great Exchange, and it breaks it down clearly into two steps. First, the believer conceptually hands over all their dirty clothes, their sins, and all those exhaustive failures to Jesus, purely by faith. Second, in return, they receive his perfect track record of righteousness and holiness. The explainer makes this crystal clear. The believer's deeply flawed record is completely replaced by a flawless external record. It's a total exchange made through faith alone, rather than an achievement earned through endless obedience.
Which brings us right to our final thought for today. If your spiritual resume was suddenly pulled for a cosmic audit right now, today, what would it look like? Would it be frantically packed with stressful human achievements and exhausting white space-filling bullet points? Or would it be totally blank, completely restful, containing only one single word? It's a massive paradigm shift that challenges the very core of how we view personal merit. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer. Until next time, keep questioning what's really on your resume.